I get asked quite often, where do I begin with Unreal Engine? In my experience, diving into the engine without any prior knowledge, can be quite overwhelming and rather daunting. Additionally, there's so many questions about, where do I start? Are there quick guides out there? Are there videos like these that I can find, etc. That's what we're going to cover in today's video, is just how to get started with the engine, how to download it, how to install it, and get your project up and running for the first time. So let's go ahead and start. So the first thing that we need to do is distinguish between the two different types of builds with the engine. Now, fundamentally, they're the same in that you're going to have engine files and you're going to have project files. But how you install the engine can vary. Now, you've probably heard that there are two different types. You've got a marketplace build and a from source build. So the marketplace build is probably the easiest, and your source build is all of the source content for the engine. Typically, you'd use this if you're in a production environment and you want full control over the engine itself. Now, if you're just getting started and you want to just learn how to use the engine, a marketplace build is absolutely fine. There's really not a whole lot of difference between the two in terms of what you can do with the editor. Just understand that a source build is going to give you full access to all of the code. So, how do we get started downloading? Well, if you head over to unrealengine.com, and then in the upper right, there's a download button. This will download the installer, which we'll come back to here in a second. If you want to download the source build, you're going to have to get access to the GitHub build, which is, you can do that through, I believe on Unreal Engine you can request it, and from there you actually get access to the GitHub build. Now here we can click the branches and we can pick the different releases that we want, and this will give us all of our source content and engine files, which we'll cover here in a little bit too. If you are building from source, you're going to need one other program, and that is Visual Studio. Now, if you do Visual Studio, just Google search it, Visual Studio downloads. I don't recommend downloading the latest version. I believe right now, at the time of this, which we're at 4.22, that the current support is for Visual Studio 2017. So on the downloads page, if you scroll down, older versions, this is where you can download 2017. Now, regardless if you're downloading 2015, 2017, 2019, all you really need is a community edition, which is free. You're going to need that for the source build version in order to compile the engine and everything that needs to happen. So again, that's the source side of it. For the marketplace build, which is what we'll be using from this point forward, it's very easy. Just to install the launcher, we'll install the engine. And that is it. So again, just to recap, to install the engine, very simply, download. It will download the Epic installer, and then from there, that's where we'll actually install our engine. So let's jump over to the launcher, which you should have installed now, and we'll explain what's happening there. Now, as you can see with my launcher, I have quite a few more things here, and that's because I've used this quite often and quite regularly, and so I've got a lot of projects, I've got a lot of files. Yours will probably look a little bit more bleak than this if you're just installing it for the first time. That's not a problem. So before we jump into actually installing an engine version, let's talk about the different tabs that we have available. So on the left, with the launcher, we've got a home, store, library, friends, Unreal Engine. The one we're primarily concerned with here is Unreal Engine. If you guys have played any of the games that are available through the launcher, you'll know that there's a whole nother side to that. The Unreal Engine side is actually where we're going to download and have all of our content, all of our files for building Unreal projects. So with that, the first tab that I want to cover is the Unreal Engine one. This is really just more of a news feed that stays updated pretty regularly so you can see what's happening, as well as some very handy links here, which we'll come back to, being the news tab, the YouTube channel that they have for Unreal Engine, the Answer Hub, the forums, and roadmap. So that's the Unreal Engine tab. The Learn tab, this is a great one too that we'll come back to, but this is where they have a lot of quick start guides if you're an artist. Great quick start guide, level designer quick start guide, and a programmer quick start guide. Additionally, if you scroll down, they have a lot of these different what they call engine feature samples, and what they are is kind of standalone projects that you can download. So each one of these in the bottom right has this little cloud with kind of a down arrow. this will download the project to your hard drive and you can open it and look through everything. So we'll come back to kind of dissecting some of these projects, but this is an awesome place to start when you've gotten a little more comfortable with the engine, the UI, and the workflow, that you can start kind of unpacking a lot of these projects to see how professionals have built these different projects. So again, that's the Learn tab. The marketplace is exactly what it sounds like. This is a place for you to download and purchase content that you can use in your projects. This is a beautiful resource because everything that's on the marketplace is available to you to use for commercial use. That means that you can use these in any of your projects and sell your project and make a profit off of it without having to pay sub-licenses or royalties for this content. Super, super great. Additionally, each month they do this free for the month thing where they'll release certain packs for free, which is a great resource for you if you don't have the time or the budget to really create all your content from scratch. Start here in the marketplace. And then lastly, what you saw when we first started this was our actual library. So in here, we've got our engine versions, different projects we've launched. Now I have to have some of these blurred out. I apologize for that, but you'll see all your projects and thumbnails. As well as down in the bottom, we have all of our content that's been downloaded and or purchased from the marketplace. So this is our launcher. Now, again, you may not have this if you've launched this for the first time. You may not have any projects or engine versions. Not a problem. So to install the engine, all you need to do is click the little plus icon. It'll pop up. In this case, because I already have most of the current ones installed, it's recognizing this is 4.17 is the one I don't have. But you can click from this drop down, click whichever version you want, and then click install, and it will immediately start downloading the engine to your hard drive. So that's it. That's all we need to do to really get the engine installed on our machine, and now we can actually start the process of going into the engine, building some things, and so on and so forth. So the next thing that I want to cover real quick is the documentation before we get into the engine. So let's go ahead and take a look at those. So if we jump back to the UnrealEngine.com website, there's a couple things that are hidden kind of in the navigation that will help us to get started with understanding the engine and where to go from there. Now, again, I'm going to cover the official channel sources first for documentation information, and then we'll cover some of the more, what I'll consider the public or community resources, including this YouTube channel, as just additional resources for you. So on the main website, there is this Learn tab, and in there's a couple things we want to be concerned with when starting out. The first thing is documentation, and the next is video tutorials. We're not going to worry about the others, but those are the primary ones. So if we click the documentation, that would open this up. This is very in-depth, very robust, and a perfect place to start. If you remember when we had the launcher, there was the Quick Artist Start Guide, the Programmer Start Guide, and I believe the Level Designer Start Guide. That will take you to little subsections in here, but in particular, what I would highly recommend out the start is this Getting Started with UE4. And what this will do is this will go through and just help to explain some of the things we're covering in this video and a little bit more as well of how to use the engine, how to get started, where your files reside, and so on and so forth. Additionally, this is a great resource that they've added, which is the Unreal Engine 4 for Unity developers. I know a lot of times Unity developers, as they get more seasoned with the engine, find that the engine may be lacking specific features that they want, or they realize that their project would be better suited in Unreal. I've got no hate towards Unity, that's fine, but of course I love Unreal, and I think from a seasoned developer standpoint, I think it's a little bit more powerful than Unity and gives you a lot more control that you wouldn't have. So if you're a Unity developer and you're switching to Unreal, I would definitely check this out. This will help to correlate and translate the UI, the workflow, and things that you've done in Unity to how it's done in Unreal. So this is a great place to start. Now, if you're getting started for the first time, just kind of breeze through this whole thing. This will give you just a great high-level overview. The next thing, so if we jump back, is this video tutorials. And this is part of what is a more overarching kind of ecosystem that Epic is building, which is called their Unreal Academy. And in this, they have various different training modules, and what I mean by that is that they've got, usually it's anywhere from like 8 to 10, maybe 15 videos that cover a very specific topic or workflow in Unreal Engine, and these are great if you like those more structured classes or things a little bit more in depth, and don't absolutely, cover a whole broad range of things, but really focus on a specific topic. So over the next few years, especially, you're going to start to see this grow. And so I highly recommend checking out the Unreal Academy, which again is just under the Learn and Video Tutorials category. The next two things which are going to be absolute help to you are the Unreal Engine forums, which is a place for you to post things, ask questions, post topics. This is very in-depth, and in fact, most of the time too, if you have a question, you run into a problem, it's probably been posted on the forums. So this will be a great place to just start searching to find answers to problems you commonly have. And then the next thing, which is considered the UE4 Answer Hub, which is more specific. It's kind of a subset, but is separate from the forums. And this is a place for you to post a specific question. If you're saying, hey, I'm having a problem with this, you can post it. You'll get answers. You can also see answers to questions that have been answered. So again, in correlation with the forums, the Answer Hub is a great place to start. Okay, so those are the official kind of Epic Unreal Engine channels that I highly recommend you look at to start with. In addition to that, I would say after you've done the process of looking through some of this, absolutely go search YouTube, go search Google, find additional resources that will help you. But again, I recommend starting with the official ones first, just to help clear the clutter and understand more fundamentally where to start with the engine. So that covers our documentation. The next thing that we want to jump into is actually understanding the file structure of the engine before we jump in, so we know exactly where our files reside and where our projects reside. So let's take a look at that right now. If you remember, when we installed the launcher and then we went in, we actually installed one of our engine versions, you'll probably notice during that workflow that it allowed you to specify where you wanted to install those engine files. We'll come back to after we create our own project, but the important thing that I want to cover in this section is understanding the difference between the engine files and the project files. So by using the launcher, of course, we've installed a marketplace build, and I'll annotate these in the video as well, but the third window, so the one on the far right, that is a from source build. And the two that are on the left are when we're using a marketplace build. And I'll explain what those are here in just a second. But the important note that I want to make certain you understand is that when you install a marketplace build, you have you have files that are for the engine specifically, so actually running the editor and everything associated with it, and then you have a separate folder for your projects. When you install a source build, all of those are kind of collapsed together, but fundamentally their folder structure is the same. So we'll kind of dissect that here right now. So the first window, the one on the left, this is that engine version that I installed using the launcher. So this is my 4.21. This is where I said to install it. And in here we have all of our engine files. So this is only the files that are needed to actually run the engine. So if you notice, there's no actual project in here. This is just the engine files. The window in the middle is a project that I've created with that engine version. So for example, when you click in your launcher, launch the engine, it will pop up a window, which we'll do here in a little bit too, and it will say select the project you want or create a project. After creating that project and specifying this is where I wanted it, these are those files. So again, the window on the left is my engine, and the one in the middle are my project files. So if I were to launch, say for example, this U project, it would launch the project using this engine version, but this is just the project itself. So that's all my files and everything contain. So again, very important. Now, if we kind of coalesce all this together and look at the third window, this is where everything is packaged together. So I'm going to highlight real quick here these engine, feature pack, samples, and templates. Exact same thing that we here have on our engine. And then I've also got this my project, which is my project file. So again, the big difference being is if you're doing a source build, you want all of these things together because they'll be working dependently together. But if you're doing a marketplace build, just know your project file will be in one location and your engine file will be in another. What's great about this is, say for example, I want to do multiple projects with my marketplace build. I could create multiple projects and store them on their own little separate folder. I could have a dozen different projects all using the same engine. So I only have to have the one engine files and then all my projects. In the source build though, I could create multiple projects, but the thing is I'm going to have separate engine builds for that. So I'd have to copy this entire folder, which could get very heavy. So again, going back to one of my earlier comments that, if you're doing projects where you're kind of just testing things or they're very basic, or say you're doing them for school or things like that, absolutely use a marketplace build. There's nothing that states you have to have a source build. Now, if you're in a professional setting where you're going to need access to that source code, you'll use this workflow. Now, again, because this is just a highlight kind of introduction to the editor, I'm not going to dive deep into the source build. But if you're watching this video and you are a more seasoned developer and you're wondering how to transition from marketplace builds to source builds, drop a comment. That is a little bit more in-depth process, but we've used it a lot at our studio. So I can help you understand how to go through that guide, how to use file versioning and stuff like that. But again, for this video, we're not going to cover that. So hopefully that makes sense in terms of kind of distinguishing where your files reside, both for the engine and your project. So with that being said, let's go ahead and start diving into actually creating our own project for the first time. So let's cover that right now. So up to this point, we've first and foremost installed our launcher, which we have here. We've clicked the plus button to install our engine version, and now we're actually ready to launch and create our first project. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and just use the 4.22.1 build, and I'm going to click launch. And what this will do is this will scan through everything. Yes, Windows, please allow. And then this should launch our project window. And from here, this is where we can select various different templates that are shipped with the engine, or we can just create one from scratch. So we'll give this a second to launch, and then we'll go ahead and start our project. All right, so now that the launcher has actually popped up, there's a couple things we can do. We can open existing projects, which those projects will also appear in our launcher, or we can create a new project, which is what we want to do. So if I click the New Project tab, you'll see a couple things. Now, you may not see the Unreal Studio, but you should by default see the blueprint and the C++. One thing to note is that with C++ code projects, typically, if you're going to go that route, you'll probably want to do a from source build. But just know that you can do it from the launcher, and what it will do is it will just install kind of the prerequisites that you need to build C++. Now, if you're doing kind of prototyping, rapid prototyping, or you're not big into the programming aspects, absolutely you can click the blueprint one. This is probably the most simplified and easiest one to start with. So in here, we've got various different templates that ship with the engine. So we can see we've got first person, flying, vehicle, advanced, virtual reality, you name it. These are actually awesome to start with. I find that most of these projects aren't incredibly heavy. That is, they don't have a lot of bloat to them, and they give you most of the functionality that you need. So for this one, though, we're going to just start with a blank one because we're not going to be worried about that. And then if we come down here, we can see that we can choose our different target. And what this is going to do is going to set some flags in the engine for when it comes to packaging and shipping. Maximum quality is fine, and no starter content. Now, you may find, in fact, actually, we'll do that. We'll do with starter content. This will be very handy. And what it will do is it will install some of the basic core content that you may want. Now, you may find after you kind of go through the learning phase and understand the engine, you'll probably want to start with no starter content because you'll be adding your own content. And then finally, we'll come down here. This is where I'm going to install mine, and then we'll just name it my project. So let's go ahead and create our project, and then we'll dive through the editor. So this process, we'll go ahead and it will create that project folder. Now, if you remember in the last chapter we talked about, the engine files reside somewhere else. This has now created a new folder where I specified called my project, and inside of there, these are my project files. So again, the editor files are untouched, so I can use those with multiple projects, again, when using a marketplace build, and then my project files reside in their own. So there we go. So now our project has been created. So the next step that I want to cover is actually understanding the UI and what it's telling us, how to customize it, and how to change things. So let's go ahead and start that process. So your editor might look a little bit different than mine. However, fundamentally, all the windows should be there. In particular, let's kind of just work our way in kind of a clockwise fashion around the editor. So up here we have our standard kind of Windows file tab where we can go in here, we can open, we can save, connect to source control, One thing we will take note is if you want to package your project underneath File, this is where we can do that. But we won't cover that right now. And then finally, if we keep going through under Edit, we've got our editor preferences, project settings, and plugins, which would be very handy. And then underneath Window, this is where we can show or hide all the various different tabs that we have here. So if you notice, I have modes enabled, which is this panel here. And then we've also got, for example, our world settings, which we have right here, and details. So this is where you can show or hide various different windows. So if you find you accidentally close something, so let's close the modes panel. We can go back up here and we can click modes and it will show back up. All right. So if we kind of, we'll continue down here. So your modes panel is your primary kind of tool set where you can drag and drop various things into the editor. Also where you can interact with terrain, blockouts, mesh, and stuff like that. So in here, you've got basic, we've got recently placed. This is where we can drop light sources. So we can drop a point light in here. I'll go ahead and delete that. We've got cameras, visual effects, geometry, volumes, and then everything that could be in here. So understand that this is kind of like your repository of where you've got various things to add to the engine. So that's the modes panel. Additionally, through here, we've got the ability to paint vertex colors, which again is a more advanced thing. We've got our landscape. This is where we can import landscape, we can sculpt it, and we can paint various materials. Our foliage tool, so we can drag meshes from our content browser into this foliage tool and paint them on the terrain, paint them on static meshes, BSPs, which are basic shapes in Unreal, and that's how we can place our foliage tool. And then finally, geometry editing. Now, something to take note of here is with the typical pipeline workflow, you can edit in Unreal. I will tell you, as an artist myself, you'll find you'll probably want to use an external program such as Maya, 3ds Max, Blender to change your geometry rather than try to do it in Engine, but understand that you do have some tools available in the engine to start with. So that covers kind of the modes panel. Over the top here, this is where we've got various different things. Now, I won't cover everything here, but the important things to note are saving your current project. The content will open your content browser. Your settings, this is where you can change, for example, your engine scalability settings to make it work better. World settings, project settings, and plugins, again, which is found up here in the edit. And then you've got a couple other things as well to help with previewing. The next thing would be blueprints. This is where you can open up your level blueprint. You can build. This is where, as you get towards later stages in your project, you want to build the lighting, build your geometry, build your navigation meshes, reflection captures. This is where you can do it. So if you click this little drop down, that's where we can do it. The play button, this is great too. So you can see we have various different options that you can test your game in the editor, or you can do, say, for example, a new editor window. So this is how you jump into game mode and actually start playing. And then finally is your launch, and this is where, again, more later towards when you're testing for shipping and stuff, this is where you can launch it on specific devices, but just know that if you're testing, you can use the play button. Okay, I'm going to skip over this main window because I'm going to come back to this at the end. But the next thing that we have is our world outliner. So this is basically just a hierarchy of everything that is contained in our scene. So if we click the chair, we can see the chair is here. I would recommend as a workflow that you create various different folders that'll keep your scene optimized and structured pretty well so you can find things. But at any point you can click either in here, you can click the actual objects in the editor, but know that they'll pop up here in your world outliner. And then of course what you can do is if you click and hold, you can actually move things. So if we move up here, sky and fog, we'll undo that. That's how you can organize and shift things. Okay, so we'll actually keep our chair selected here, which brings us to the next panel, which is probably your most important one, is your details panel. So when you click an object or an asset that's in the editor, the details panel will pull up everything that's contained in it. So we've got the ability to move it, to rotate it, to scale it. Now we've got tools in the editor as well, but just know that this is where you can put in certain values. So if I say move this to 35, you'll see it shifts it up. So we'll move that back to 32. Mobility, we won't cover this. This is more advanced. And then we've also got our static mesh, material associated with it, and a bunch of different settings. So this will change per object that you have, but know that everything that you can change on that will be displayed in this details panel. One thing I do want to make note of real quick while we're here in the details panel are these little drop downs. And this is the show advanced. So if I expand these out, now those are probably very simple examples, but underneath the physics, you can see when we expand this, we get a bunch of additional things that pop up. So as you're starting the editor, you're probably not going to be too concerned about, what's hidden in these advanced rollups, but just know that as you continue to learn the editor and learn the engine, that chances are you're actually going to want to see what's hidden in these advanced rollups, because there's a lot of good controls in there and things that will help you to just refine and get the look that you want or change your assets. So just be aware that throughout the whole engine and different windows, there are these little advanced rollups. Okay, and as we kind of continue around here in the clockwise fashion, we have our content browser. I'm going to select this little guy, which is to show our little side panel, which is very similar like a Windows workflow. And in here, this is where we have all of our different files. So if I select things, you can see this is where I can select all of my geometry, my assets, anything that I want built into the project. Additionally, I can go in here and I can right click and do new folders. I can do it at the root, or I can do it here, create new folders. So that is the general file structure of our content browser. Additionally, and I'll show you this as well, is our right-click menu. So let's say, for example, I come into my materials here, which we have a bunch of different materials, and I want to create a new material. I can right-click, and I can click New Material. Let's say my material. Remove the space. There we go. So there is my asset. I can double-click it, and that will pop up what is our next window, which is actually customizing and editing the different things. So this one is the materials window, which we won't be covering necessarily in this video, because again, this is just more to introduce you to the engine. But that will bring up the different parameters and different properties of that actual asset. So I'll go ahead and close this. And in fact, let's go over to one of our assets. So I'm going to click this guy, our chair, which I know is a mesh. I'm going to come over to my static mesh, click the little, what is kind of like the magnifying glass, and this will browse to the asset where it's at in the editor. And I'll double click this, and you can see we get a different window. But again, this is specifically for this asset from our content browser. Okay, so that kind of covers our content browser, how we add different things. I guess I should note too, in addition to right-clicking in your content browser, you can actually go up here to add new, which you'll see it's pretty much the exact same, but this is where we can add all the various different things in the engine. Additionally, we can import, which there's a couple ways to do that, but again, not super concerned with that right now. Just understand that your content browser is going to have everything contained in it. Okay, and then I'm going to ignore this layers one. If you wanted to, you can go to Windows, you can show layers. This is just an additional kind of organization tool that you have when building your different levels to be able to show and hide and group things together outside of your world outliner. But fundamentally, that is kind of the overview of the editor. Now, the last thing, because I mentioned this, we skipped this, that I want to cover is your main viewport window, which is right here. So the quick controls for this is if I right click and I hold right click, this allows me to move my camera. Now, if I press W, this will give me my move tool, which I can also select up here. I can press E, which is rotate. I select it here as well. And R, which will be my scale. This is a common workflow that you find in, say, for Maya, Autodesk Maya, since Maya is one of the primary tools that Epic uses and what the engine's kind of been built around in terms of creating content and importing it to the engine. So you can use those as hotkeys. However, the W key is also used in conjunction with ASD, so if you're used to kind of moving around PC games. So if I click and hold my right mouse button and I press W, I'll go forward. If I press S, I'll go backwards, D will go right, and A will go left. So this is how I can kind of move around my scene and view everything that way. So just understand that you have to press and hold the right click to activate that. Okay, so explaining a little bit what is in the actual main window here. So if I select this drop down, you can see there's a couple things we can do by changing our field of view. So that's just that camera that's being viewed there. We've got some other different things we can choose, kind of some preset layouts. So if I go down here to layouts, you can see there's various different ones. So we could click here, for example, we can get our little fan out here. I'm going to go back to our primary one pane. So we'll have this perspective. I can click this drop down and choose different cameras. So if I wanted to see my left camera, this is one way to do that. Under lit, this is great. These are kind of what are considered debug visualizations or view modes. So if I go to say for unlit, this is no lighting. If I go to detail lighting, this will have all my normal information and just my lighting. So various different things you can change here. Here's another one, buffer visualization overview. This is a great way if you're an artist and you're trying to figure out how your assets are reacting in the engine. That's a way to do that. So those are our view modes. And then finally under show, this is where we can show or hide different things in the editor. So for example, if I turn off my grid, you'll notice that it hides my grid in the background. So a bunch of different other things, but this is just a way that we can show and hide different components in the viewport as opposed to over in our world outliner. So moving on to the upper right, some of our additional controls. So as we covered before, we've got our move, rotate, and scale. The next button to the right of that is a little globe icon. This switches between local mode and world translation. So for example, if I select this, I guess there's kind of a little statue or something in the middle, and I have global, you'll notice that it aligns very well. So if we look down here, X, Y, and Z, the little manipulator aligns itself with the actual world space. Now if I click local, you'll notice that it rotates because this particular object has been rotated a little bit, and this is its local coordinate space. So this is how you can switch between various different modes from world space or local space. And then finally, all of these three share something very in common. So this first one is our move snapping. The second one is our rotate snapping, and then the third one is our scale snapping. So if we select this drop down, you can see we've got surface snapping that allows us to actually move the object, and it will snap to the surface of that object. So that's super handy. You can turn that on or off. This guy right here, as the same with these other three, this actually enables or disables snapping. So if I go here to move, and you notice that it kind of snaps in increments, this is because it's snapping in increments of 10. Now if I turn this off, I can now free move this without it snapping. So we'll undo that. And that is how you toggle those on and off. And then finally, the last bit here is your actual snap steps. So as I had it at 10, let's change it down to 1 and move, and you'll see that it snaps in much smaller increments. Same thing with our rotate, the different degrees that we can snap, and then also our scale snapping as well. So that kind of covers the snap steps. And really the only last thing that we have with this particular viewport is our camera speed. So if you notice, if I hold my right mouse button down and I move in and out, okay, now this can go rather slow, it can go rather fast. If we had this, for example, set way up to 7 and I barely press, it's flying all over the place. So you can turn this down. So for example, I can turn it down to 1 and you notice it's very, very slow. So if you want a little bit more precision. And then one other little trick here too is if you want to change this on the fly, as you're moving in and out, you can, and I'll show here on the video, you can scroll your mouse wheel up while you still have right click enabled. So right click and hold and then move my mouse wheel. And what this will do is this will speed up the camera or slow it down. Let me reset this back to 4 just so we can see. So again, right click holding, moving in and out, and if I scroll down, you'll notice it goes much slower. I scroll up, it goes a little bit faster. So that's a way to kind of toggle it on the fly. So the very last thing that I want to cover in kind of this introduction video is to help you understand some of the tools that are available to you to kind of advance yourself. So obviously we've stepped through the process of downloading, installing the engine, and creating our first project, but now you want to take it to that next level. So as I mentioned before too, some of those public resources that you have available are the Learn tab, the YouTube channel, say for example this one, other YouTube channels of course, Epic's official YouTube channel, their live streams, some documentation, even just a quick Google search. But one of the things that I've found from a professional standpoint as being one of the best teaching resources is dissecting other people's work, other projects. And with that, if we go back to the Epic launcher, underneath the Learn tab, this is where we have a bunch of those sample codes. So I've gone ahead and just downloaded this content examples, which will open right now. And in here, this is a great place to start. So with it, I can right click, I can do play from here, and we can go in, we can see, everything that's happening, read some of the stuff. We can, for example, run down here, we can step on the button and see that it actually does, some various different things. We can go here, activate the button, so on and so forth. So I'll jump out by pressing escape, and I can simply select this light function. I can do edit the BP basic, and I can see how they've constructed this particular blueprint. So this is kind of reverse engineering at its best. So you get a chance to see how professionals set up a project and then go about recreating it yourself. As another thing as well, just to show you some of the things that do ship with the content that's in that Learn tab, you can see here that we've got a bunch of different resources. So I'll go ahead and open this landscape one, since that's definitely something people start out with. And in here they've got the example content, the example landscape. I can go over here, I can browse here to go see where it's at. Okay, here's my material instance. Again, this is a idea. I know this material instance is built off of this master material. I'll go ahead and open this master material and start looking through how this is set up. So again, there's some great resources to help you kind of just advance to the next level once you've got the engine installed and you want to see how are other people using these projects. So hopefully that covers all the basics. I realize that there's a lot of things we could go in depth with, but this was really just a chance to show you the engine, how to get it installed, how to run it, how to get your first project up and running, and then some of the tools that kind of help you advance. So I definitely hope this helped. I hope this answers most of the questions for those of you that are getting started with the engine. If I've missed something, absolutely drop a comment in the comment section, and I'll do what I can to kind of cover those. And as always, I really appreciate you guys' support in helping to kind of grow this channel and to help me be able to provide these resources to you. So if you have suggestions for future videos, drop them in the comment, and I'll do what I can to make it happen. So thanks for watching. Catch you on the next one.